The British Raj was the rule of the British Empire in the Indian subcontinent between 1858 and 1947. The term can also refer to the period of dominion. The region under British control, commonly called India, included areas directly administered by Britain as well as the princely states ruled by individual rulers under the paramountcy of the British Crown. The region is now less commonly also called British India or the Indian Empire. The Empire of India was officially created by Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli for Queen Victoria in 1876. As India, it was a founding member of the League of Nations, a participating nation in the Summer Olympics in 1900, 1920, 1928, 1932, and 1936. And a founding member of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. The system of governance was instituted on June 28, 1858, when the rule of the British East India Company was transferred to the Crown in the person of Queen Victoria, and lasted until 1947, when the British Indian Empire was partitioned into two sovereign dominion states, the Union of India and the Dominion of Pakistan. At the inception of the Raj in 1858, Lower Burma was already a part of British India, Upper Burma was added in 1886, and the resulting Union, Burma, was administered as an autonomous province until 1937, when it became a separate British colony, gaining its own independence in 1948. Geographical extent. The British Raj extended over almost all present-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, except for small holdings by other European nations such as Goa and Pondicherry. In addition, at various times, it included Aden, Lower Burma, Upper Burma, British Somaliland, and Singapore. Burma was separated from India and directly administered by the British Crown from 1937 until its independence in 1948. The trucial states of the Persian Gulf were theoretically princely states as well as presidencies and provinces of British India until 1946 and used the rupee as their unit of currency. Among other countries in the region, Ceylon was ceded to Britain in 1802 under the Treaty of Amiens. Ceylon was part of Madras Presidency between 1793 and 1798. The kingdoms of Nepal and Bhutan, having fought wars with the British, subsequently signed treaties with them and were recognized by the British as independent states. The Kingdom of Sikkim was established as a princely state after the Anglo-Sikkimese Treaty of 1861. However, the issue of sovereignty was left undefined. The Maldive Islands were a British protectorate from 1887 to 1965, but not part of British India. British India and the princely states. India during the British Raj was made up of two types of territory: British India and the native states. In its Interpretation Act 1889, the British Parliament adopted the following definitions in Section 18. The expression, British India, shall mean all territories and places within Her Majesty's dominions which are for the time being governed by Her Majesty through the Governor-General of India or through any governor or other officer subordinate to the Governor-General of India. The expression, India, shall mean British India together with any territories of any native prince or chief under the suzerainty of Her Majesty, exercised through the Governor-General of India, or through any governor or other officer subordinate to the Governor-General of India. In general, the term, British India, had been used to refer also to the regions under the rule of the British East India Company in India from 1600 to 1858. The term has also been used to refer to the British in India. The terms Indian Empire and Empire of India were not used in legislation. The monarch was known as Empress or Emperor of India, and the term was often used in Queen Victoria's Queen's speeches and prorogation speeches. The passports issued by the British Indian government had the words Indian Empire on the cover and Empire of India on the inside. In addition, an Order of Knighthood, the most eminent order of the Indian Empire, was set up in 1878. suzerainty over 175 princely states, some of the largest and most important, was exercised by the central government of British India under the Viceroy. The remaining approximately 500 states were dependents of the provincial governments of British India under a governor, lieutenant governor, or chief commissioner. A clear distinction between dominion and suzerainty was supplied by the jurisdiction of the courts of law. The law of British India rested upon the laws passed by the British Parliament and the legislative powers those laws vested in the various governments of British India, both central and local. In contrast, the courts of the princely states existed under the authority of the respective rulers of those states. Major provinces at the turn of the 20th century. British India consisted of 8 provinces that were administered either by a governor or a lieutenant governor. During the partition of Bengal, the new provinces of Assam and East Bengal were created as a lieutenant governorship. In 1911, East Bengal was reunited with Bengal, and the new provinces in the east became Assam, Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. Minor provinces. In addition, there were a few minor provinces that were administered by a chief commissioner. Princely states. A princely state, also called a native state or an Indian state, was a nominally sovereign entity with an indigenous Indian ruler, subject to a subsidiary alliance. There were 565 princely states when India and Pakistan became independent from Britain in August 1947. The princely states did not form a part of British India, as they were not directly under British rule. The larger ones had treaties with Britain that specified which rights the princes had. In the smaller ones, the princes had few rights. Within the princely states, external affairs, defence and most communications were under British control. The British also exercised a general influence over the states' internal politics, in part through the granting or withholding of recognition of individual rulers. Although there were nearly 600 princely states, the great majority were very small and contracted out the business of government to the British. Some 200 of the states had an area of less than 25 square kilometers. Organization. Following the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the Government of India Act 1858 made changes in the governance of India at 3 levels. In the imperial government in London, in the central government in Calcutta, and in the provincial governments in the presidencies. In London, it provided for a cabinet-level Secretary of State for India and a 15-member Council of India, whose members were required, as one prerequisite of membership, to have spent at least 10 years in India and to have done so no more than 10 years before. Although the Secretary of State formulated the policy instructions to be communicated to India, he was required in most instances to consult the Council, but especially so in matters relating to spending of Indian revenues. The Act envisaged a system of double government, in which the Council ideally served both as a check on excesses in imperial policy-making and as a body of up-to-date expertise on India. However, the Secretary of State also had special emergency powers that allowed him to make unilateral decisions, and, in reality, the Council's expertise was sometimes outdated. From 1858 until 1947, 27 individuals served as Secretary of State for India and directed the India Office. These included Sir Charles Wood, Marquess of Salisbury, John Morley, S. Montagu, and Frederick Pethick Lawrence. The size of the Advisory Council was reduced over the next half-century, but its powers remained unchanged. In 1907, for the first time, 2 Indians were appointed to the council. They were K.G. Gupta and Syed Hussain Bilgrami. In Calcutta, the Governor-General remained head of the Government of India and now was more commonly called the Viceroy on account of his secondary role as the Crown's representative to the nominally sovereign princely states. He was, however, now responsible to the Secretary of State in London and through him to Parliament. A system of double government had already been in place during the Company's rule in India from the time of Pitt's India Act of 1784. the Governor-General in the capital, Calcutta, and the governor in a subordinate presidency was each required to consult his advisory council. Executive orders in Calcutta, for example, were issued in the name of Governor-General in Council. The company's system of double government had its critics, since, from the time of the system's inception, there had been intermittent feuding between the Governor-General and his council. Still, the Act of 1858 made no major changes in governance. However, in the years immediately thereafter, which were also the years of post-rebellion reconstruction, Viceroy Lord Canning found the collective decision-making of the council to be too time-consuming for the pressing tasks ahead. So he requested the portfolio system of an executive council in which the business of each government department was assigned to and became the responsibility of a single council member. Routine departmental decisions were made exclusively by the member, but important decisions required the consent of the Governor-General and, in the absence of such consent, required discussion by the entire Executive Council. This innovation in Indian governance was promulgated in the Indian Councils Act 1861. If the Government of India needed to enact new laws, the Councils Act allowed for a legislative council, an expansion of the Executive Council by up to 12 additional members, each appointed to a 2-year term, with half the members consisting of British officials of the government and allowed to vote, and the other half comprising Indians and domiciled Britons in India and serving only in an advisory capacity. All laws enacted by legislative councils in India, whether by the Imperial Legislative Council in Calcutta or by the provincial ones in Madras and Bombay, required the final assent of the Secretary of State in London. This prompted Sir Charles Wood, the second Secretary of State, to describe the Government of India as a despotism controlled from home. Moreover, although the appointment of Indians to the Legislative Council was a response to calls after the 1857 rebellion, most notably by Syed Ahmad Khan, for more consultation with Indians, the Indians so appointed were from the landed aristocracy, often chosen for their loyalty, and far from representative. Even so, the tiny advances in the practice of representative government were intended to provide safety valves for the expression of public opinion, which had been so badly misjudged before the rebellion. Indian affairs now also came to be more closely examined in the British Parliament and more widely discussed in the British press. With the promulgation of the Government of India Act 1935, the Council of India was abolished with effect from 1 April 1937 and a modified system of government enacted. The Secretary of State for India represented the Government of India in the UK. He was assisted by a body of advisers numbering from 8 to 12 individuals, at least half of whom were required to have held office in India for a minimum of 10 years. And had not relinquished office earlier than 2 years prior to their appointment as advisers to the Secretary of State. The Viceroy and Governor-General of India, a Crown appointee, typically held office for 5 years though there was no fixed tenure, and received an annual salary of Rs. 250,800 per. He headed the Viceroy's Executive Council, each member of which had responsibility for a department of the central administration. From 1 April 1937, the position of Governor-General in Council, which the Viceroy and Governor-General concurrently held in the capacity of representing the Crown in relations with the Indian princely states, was replaced by the designation of HM representative for the exercise of the functions of the Crown in its relations with the Indian states, or the Crown representative. The Executive Council was greatly expanded during the Second World War, and in 1947 comprised 14 members, each of whom earned a salary of Rs. 66,000 per. The portfolios in 1946–1947 were External Affairs and Commonwealth Relations, Home and Information and Broadcasting, Food and Agriculture, Transport and Railways, Labour, Industries and Supplies, works, mines and power, education, defense, finance, commerce, communications, health, law. Until 1946, the Viceroy held the portfolio for external affairs and Commonwealth relations, as well as heading the political department in his capacity as the Crown representative. Each department was headed by a secretary excepting the Railway Department, which was headed by a Chief Commissioner of Railways under a secretary. The Viceroy and Governor-General was also the head of the bicameral Indian legislature, consisting of an upper house and a lower house. The Viceroy was the head of the Council of State, while the Legislative Assembly, which was first opened in 1921, was headed by an elected president. The Council of State consisted of 58 members, while the Legislative Assembly comprised 141 members. The Council of State existed in 5-year periods and the Legislative Assembly for 3-year periods, though either could be dissolved earlier or later by the Viceroy. The Indian legislature was empowered to make laws for all persons resident in British India, including all British subjects resident in India, and for all British Indian subjects residing outside India, with the assent of the King Emperor, and after copies of a proposed enactment had been submitted to both houses of the British Parliament. The Viceroy could overrule the legislature and directly enact any measures in the perceived interests of British India or its residents if the need arose. Effective from 1 April 1936, the Government of India Act created the new provinces of Sindh and Orissa. Burma and Aden became separate Crown colonies under the Act from 1 April 1937, thereby ceasing to be part of the Indian Empire. From 1937 onwards, British India was divided into 17 administrations. The 3 presidencies of Madras, Bombay and Bengal, and the 14 provinces of the United Provinces, Punjab, Bihar, the Central Provinces and Barryob, Assam, the Northwest Frontier Province, Orissa, Sindh, British Balochistan, Delhi, Ajmer-Mewara, Coorg, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Pandpiploda. The presidencies and the first 8 provinces were each under a governor, while the latter 6 provinces were each under a chief commissioner. The Viceroy directly governed the chief commissioner provinces through each respective chief commissioner, while the presidencies and the provinces under governors were allowed greater autonomy under the Government of India Act. Each presidency or province headed by a governor had either a provincial bicameral legislature or a unicameral legislature. The governor of each presidency or province represented the Crown in his capacity, and was assisted by ministers appointed from the members of each provincial legislature. Each provincial legislature had a life of 5 years, barring any special circumstances such as wartime conditions. All bills passed by the provincial legislature were either signed or rejected by the governor, who could also issue proclamations or promulgate ordinances while the legislature was in recess, as the need arose. Each province or presidency comprised a number of divisions, each headed by a commissioner and subdivided into districts, which were the basic administrative units, and each headed by a collector and magistrate or deputy commissioner. In 1947, British India comprised 230 districts.